Hello. So today I am going to be presenting my illness story. My story begins back in 2012 and it includes my immediate family. So my mom, Carrie, my dad, Alan, my sister, Aubrey, my brother, Trey, my brother, Jordan, and then my two grandparents on my mom's side, Mimi and Pampa, which is Nancy and Carl. To others. And so those are the people that are included in this. And then the illness that kind of played a big part in this was lung cancer. And this was diagnosed to my grandpa. So a little bit about the journey to the diagnosis. I was very young and at that time definitely didn't know what a terminal illness was. I remember knowing a little bit about cancer and knowing that it was really bad, but not really understanding that it meant that he was going to die, I don't think, at that time. And so whenever I found out about it, I was in the car and I had just finished a Little League softball game and I just won. I was really excited. We went to Freddy's and got ice cream. And I remember just like a few minutes into the car ride, my mom said she had some news for me, and obviously I was very confused. And so she told me that my grandpa went to the doctor, my Pampa, and they said they were just doing a routine checkup and they found some bad signs. And so I was obviously like, well, what is it? Did they figure it out? And my mom told me that he had cancer. And that it was started in his lungs, but it had spread to other parts of his body. And so immediately, I knew that cancer was bad. And so immediately I was like, well, what is he going to do? How's he going to fix it? Asking all those questions. And she said he's going to start chemo, but we don't know what's going to happen, and he may not have very long. And I remember her telling me that we may not have very long because that was slapped me in the face, because that was the first time I had considered that he was going to die. And so that was a big shock. And so what I did immediately after is I was like, well, what are we going to do? And she was like, we're already on our way over there. I want you to be with him. And so whenever I saw him, I remember it being really awkward because I just wanted to hug him and cry. But I didn't really know how that would work because I felt weird talking about it because I was just told and everyone else was just told. And so we were kind of like scooting around the problem and hoping that somebody else would bring it up. And I just remember feeling really sad that day and just like walking around in my softball gear in the back garden wherever we were hanging out with my grandpa in his backyard. He loved to garden. So he was gardening and we were kind of just walking around and talking to him, small talk, and I remember it being really awkward. And so then later that night I broke down. I called a friend and I kind of vented to her and told her what was going on, and that's kind of how I dealt with it in the moment. Some of the treatments that he underwent was chemo. He did typical chemo for a while and obviously destroyed his body, just wrecked his body. You can just like tell in a lot of chemo patients that they become weaker, and he was one of those people that became weaker. Biologically, he lost his hair. He couldn't eat. He was so thin. He was thinner than me at that time, and I was little. He lost his hair, like I said. He could not move, and so that impaired everything that he did. And so that kind of affected his social life. He didn't go out. Anybody that he would have spent time with, they had to come to him if they wanted to. And so that was really tough for him because he was such a people person. And so that affected that. And then he couldn't do what he loved to do. He loved to garden and he loved to go fishing, and he couldn't do that, which really affected his psychological state. And he became really sad and very remorseful, and just, you could tell he was starting to mourn the things he was losing. And so that was really hard. And he also at one point became so unable to speak, and that was towards the end before he passed away, that that he couldn't even speak, and he was so out of it. And there was this one time that I came in and I remember saying, Channing Tatum is so hot, smoking hot. And he popped his head up and he said, don't you smoke in this house. And he wasn't aware that that's what I was saying, but that I just remember breaking down because I thought he was yelling at me, and in reality he didn't understand what's happening, and he just heard smoke, and he contributes his cancer to smoking. And so that was really hard on him, and so that kind of tells where his state was at. He didn't know what was happening in the room, and he would often say things that didn't make sense, and so he was starting to deteriorate. But spiritually, he just dove deep into his faith. He felt confident that he was going to heaven, and I know he's in heaven, and he was a devoted follower of Christ. And he would talk to us about Jesus, and he had his Bible, and he was reading it and talking to us about him leading up to the point until he couldn't do anything anymore. And then when he was on his deathbed, when he really wasn't in it, there was like a light shining down through the window, and he opened his eyes and he says, I can see my mom. She's dancing with Jesus. And so that was just something special to know that he could see his mom. And what you believe is personal to you, but I believe that that was a comforting sign from God that he was going to be okay. And he needed that because he was starting to get kind of riled up. And so that was really special, that even though he had to undergo chemo, and it went all the way around and really just destroyed his body, he stayed around longer, which in the long run, don't know if that would have been beneficial. But so some of the strengths and unexpected challenges that emerged from this illness story was that our family definitely came together more, like never before, because we were always a close family, but our immediate family and our cousins, we kind of kept separate. We did occasionally play together, but that was something that brought the entire family together. It brought up conversations we didn't think we'd have. We spent 10 times more time together. It was just really special because we got to spend more time with our cousins and more time with our grandparents than we would have ever before. The way that it's influenced me as an individual is that in that moment, I remember thinking, during that time period when everything was happening and being over at their house constantly, I remember thinking to myself, like, wow, if this illness would not have happened, I would not have been here, and I wouldn't have seen how important it is to spend time with family and soak up every minute before they go. And so that was something that really, really touched my heart because it made me view life from a different perspective. I think it was the same for my family as well, especially my brother Trey. He was somebody who was really quiet. He didn't trust a lot of people, and my grandpa was his role model. And so when he got sick, it was like his world was getting sick and his world was dying. And so he just really invested in that relationship. He learned what emotions were. He spent time fixing up a truck with my grandpa, and that made my brother feel so special, obviously. And because he did that, I think he learned that he was preparing himself for the death. And I know my grandpa tried to spend a lot of time with him to make sure that it would be okay and that he would be okay, and teach him about what death was and about Jesus. And I think he took the death the hardest for sure. But I think he lives life differently as well. He really appreciates my grandmas and loves on them and loves my parents and shows them a lot of affection now rather than when he did, because it was just really hard for him. And he was only a year older than me, so we were both really young. The way that this illness has shaped my beliefs and biases about illnesses, medicine, and the medical community is tough, because the medical community, I didn't feel like I had any problems with. I remember going to one of his doctor's appointments, and it was pretty straightforward. I remember asking questions as a little girl, trying to find out answers, and, my parents were like, shh, be quiet, let the doctor talk, and But I remember asking a bunch of questions, and the doctor was answering them, and that was something that was really special because, like, I was a little girl and I was just curious. And so having them answer those questions and be kind was really vital and important for me at that age, especially during that hard time. And so I really appreciated that. So I haven't had any bad experiences with the medical community. However, the medicine and chemo, I have a very strong outlook against chemo because I think it just really takes away a person's quality of life. And I know that there are other medications out there now that may help with symptoms that people are experiencing that may be dying when it comes to cancer. And so seeing somebody do chemo and try to fight so hard for their life and just see their life deteriorate, that is so hard for me. And I also think it depends on age, but my grandpa was a lot older and he didn't get to go fishing and he didn't get to go garden in his backyard any last few times because he couldn't even move. He was so weak and I could see every part of his bones. And so I have a really tough time thinking that chemo is a good thing. And so I think my view on that is a little biased. I don't like it. But I do understand why people do it. They want to live longer and they want to fight for their life. And I can also appreciate that. However, the belief about the illness, that's really tough because I just have always believed that cancer is just a flawed part of humanity. And because I am a person of faith, I believe that we've come into this world with sin and things develop in our body that are sinful as well. And so because of that, like, that's not something that I don't think God puts on us because he is saying you deserve this. But I think that we live in a broken world and broken things happen to our broken bodies. And when it comes to therapy, I don't want to use the word broken. But when it comes to Christianity, those are the words that tend to be used. And so I think that that's just a flaw in human nature. And so I don't think my grandpa was diagnosed with cancer or got cancer because God was trying to spite him. I think that he got cancer and he found meaning in that, and he found a way to get closer to Jesus. And I think that a lot of times that's a point that even at our lowest lows, like, we'll still turn to Jesus. And that's something I learned from him, is that even when I'm in the most pain I could ever be, emotionally or physically, like, I can always turn to Jesus and he'll always take care of me. And that's just really personal for me, and I love that. So then, if I'm thinking about a family therapist being involved, I think it would have been really helpful, especially with me in that little office asking all those questions, having somebody to sit and be patient with me, because I know that the doctor was answering my questions, but I probably was not being, the most patient child. And I know there were a lot of us in the room. And so being able to kind of just sit with the illness, I think would have been really important, especially for my mom and my grandma, because my mom smokes and my grandma was furious at my grandpa because he did it to himself, pretty much is what she thought. And so she had these beliefs about the illness, and my mom had these fears about the illness because she smokes, and they never really got to talk about that. And instead, my mom would get sly comments like, better not do that or else you end up like Pampa. And my Mimi would say, shouldn't have done that, Carl. And so there was just a lot of guilt and a lot of blaming. And I think that ended up really hurting my mom. And I think still today she hurts. And so I think having a medical family therapist involved would have given everybody a chance to express how they'd been feeling about the illness. Because while we were just kids, being able to explain that we just wanted to hug our grandpa and soak up time with him, I think would have been nice to say, but I didn't have the voice to say it because I was nervous and dorky and was embarrassed. And I think my mom would have really benefited from being able to talk about how it makes her feel when people make those comments to her. And I've had discussions with her today, and she states that still hurts her. and that she's trying. And I think the biggest thing she could have had at that time was support, that she could quit, rather than blame and guilting her into doing it, or else she might die, which is a horrible thing to do, but I think a lot of people did that out of fear. So having somebody involved would have been able to facilitate that conversation and also help us prepare to see him deteriorate, because I don't think anyone told us how bad it was going to get, and I think it was really hard to watch. My parents didn't let us go and see him that last week because it was so bad, and my mom said you couldn't even recognize him, and so that was something that was really hard, and they didn't want us to see. And so I think being prepared for that would have been nice, and having that conversation. When it comes to thinking about preparing for this presentation, I was really nervous for a long time because I haven't talked about my grandpa in a long time, because it's been, 9 years? And that by itself is hard, because you learn to process. And I saw this metaphor of this jar, and your jar grows around your grief ball. Your grief ball doesn't shrink. And I think that's true. And I think I've just learned to grow around my grief, and learned to grow to a point where I know that it's a part of me, but I haven't thought about it in a while. And so that was really hard to think about all over again, especially as I was writing things down and jotting the people involved and the different biases I have now, especially working in the medical setting now. I see some things that are really cool, and some things that I'm like, I wish that would change. And so, especially being involved, it feels like there's some pressure on me to, be that change, which is really good, because I want to be that person that I wish I would have had in the room with us. I've realized that I'm still kind of weary of doctors in general. I think that also comes from the book that we read in ethics class about the power that we hold as therapists and the power that doctors hold as doctors. There's a lot of trust that just goes in, and sometimes there's not proof in the pudding. It's just like, trust me, I'm a doctor. But the reality is that as therapists and as doctors, we have things that are personal in our lives, and maybe a doctor needs to get home and eat food, and so he cuts off a thing early because he feels like it. And in that case, you're not giving the care that you need. And so I think I've always been a little weary of doctors, and I just want to make sure that when I'm trusting a doctor, I have a personal relationship with them as well, in a way that I can have that conversation about what that care might look like. I want to make sure that's clear. And then I also want to make it clear to my clients about situations that are going on, and I want to inform them of all the different options, and also help them to be able to process through what's going on with their loved one, even if it's hard. Because I think sometimes we'll sit with people and say, yeah, that's really hard, but we don't sit with them for a whole hour, but maybe they need a whole hour. And so I want to give them the space and the time to do that if they need it. And so that is a little bit about my illness story. Overall, I feel really blessed to have gotten all the time I did with my grandpa, and thinking about him, I really miss him. But, I was told the other day that my husband resembles my grandpa when he was young, so that was something that was kind of special, and something I'll kind of hold on to. And so, yeah, thanks for watching.